The night Chuck Norris protected a stranger alone against 6 men. Nobody believed it until they saw Los Angeles, California. Late autumn, 1971. A Friday night, somewhere between 11 and midnight. The kind of hour when certain parts of the city reveal what they are behind the surface they wear in the daytime. The parking structures half lit, the side streets emptying, the sound of traffic thinning to a hum that makes the silences between cars feel longer than they are. The bar was on a secondary street, in a neighborhood that was neither rough enough to be avoided, nor comfortable enough to be careless. It had a name on a sign above the door that the rain had been working on for years and was winning. Inside, the light was the amber of old wood and slow evenings, and the patrons were the kind of people who knew the bartender's name because they had been there often enough to earn the familiarity. Chuck Norris was 31 years old. He was at the height of his competitive career, the middleweight karate champion, a man whose name was known in every serious martial arts school in the country. He was also a man who did not wear his capabilities the way some do, like a warning or an invitation. He dressed simply, moved without display, and could sit at a bar or a diner and not attract the kind of attention that a man of his reputation might be expected to generate. He had been in Los Angeles for a meeting. The specifics are unimportant. One of the many practical concerns of running a growing network of schools and navigating the early conversations about film work that were beginning to surface, and he was stopping briefly before driving home. He was not alone that evening, but he was not with anyone who mattered to what followed. He had come in with an associate. They had spoken about what they needed to speak about, and the associate had left. Chuck had ordered a second drink he wasn't particularly interested in, and was in the particular state of mild tiredness that comes after a day of conversations. The kind of tiredness that is not physical but attentional. The body is fine, but the mind has been processing input for many hours and has begun to want silence. He noticed the situation outside through the window before he noticed it consciously, which is the way training at a certain level operates. Something in the peripheral field of attention, a quality of movement, a configuration of bodies that the part of the brain responsible for threat assessment was already analyzing before the thinking mind caught up. He looked. There was a man outside, in the parking area adjacent to the bar, who was the center of a loose circle of 6 others. The man in the center was small, noticeably smaller than the others, and dressed in the way of someone who had not planned for this kind of evening. His name, as Chuck would learn much later, was Daniel Ruiz. He worked 2 jobs and lived in a neighborhood on the east side, and had stopped at this bar on his way home because he was tired, and the walk from the bus stop had been longer than usual, and he had wanted to sit down somewhere warm for 10 minutes before the rest of the journey. The 6 men surrounding him were not specifically threatening him yet, in the legal sense of the word. They were in that space that predators often inhabit before violence becomes explicit, casual and almost friendly, which is its own kind of threat because it denies the victim the clear signal that would justify response. One of them was leaning against Daniel's car, or what Daniel had gestured toward as his car, arms crossed and smiling in a way that had nothing friendly in it. The others were distributed around him in a way that was not an accident, that was in fact a very old and simple geometry designed to eliminate the possibility of an exit that isn't through them. Chuck set down his drink. He didn't finish it. He didn't make a decision in the deliberate sense. It was not a moment of weighing options. It was simply a recognition followed by movement, which is what years of training produce when the training has been done correctly. The training is supposed to compress the distance between perception and response, to eliminate the stutter of self-consideration that costs a person the moment they needed to act in. He went outside. He did not move quickly, which surprised those who would later try to reconstruct the sequence. He walked out of the bar at a pace that was entirely ordinary, and he moved toward the group with the same ordinariness, as if he were walking toward his car, as if the group were not there, or were not what they were. This is a specific and deliberate technique, not in the sense of a formal martial arts technique, but in the psychological sense. Aggression anticipates aggression. It is calibrated to respond to threat signals. Someone who does not emit threat signals, who approaches with the body language of someone going to water a plant, disrupts the anticipatory architecture of what was about to happen. He stopped a few feet from the edge of the group, not inside the circle, but close enough that his stopping was meaningful. He looked at the man leaning against the car and said nothing for a moment. The man said something, a question without a real question mark, the kind of territorial assertion that is designed to see how the new arrival is positioned. Chuck said, "He's with me." He had never spoken to Daniel Ruiz before. Daniel did not know who Chuck Norris was. He had been in the center of 6 men in a parking lot, trying to calculate his options, which were poor, and then suddenly there was another man standing at the edge of the circle saying something that could not possibly be true. The man against the car smiled differently now. The smile was a recalibration, not retreat, but assessment. There were 6 of them and 1 of Chuck. Those were numbers that pointed in a clear direction, and the man against the car was experienced enough with situations of this kind to trust the numbers rather than the quality of the variable. What happened over the next few minutes has been described differently by the people who were there. a couple from the bar who had followed Chuck out of instinct or curiosity, the bartender who appeared in the doorway, Daniel himself, who was watching from the inside of what was happening, and therefore had both the clearest and most distorted view. What they agree on is this: Chuck did not initiate anything. He stood where he was standing, and he did not change his expression, and he did not make any of the physical adjustments that are the usual prelude to aggression. No weight shift, no hands coming up, no visible change in breathing. He was simply there, and there was something in the quality of his presence that was different from anything the 6 men had encountered in their collective experience of situations like this. One of the men on the periphery moved first. It was not the leader. It was someone trying to establish himself, someone trying to press the situation past the stalemate. He moved toward Chuck in a way that was not quite an attack, but was close enough that the distance had to be addressed. Chuck addressed it. He did it quickly and completely and with the minimum necessary force, and the man was on the ground without quite having understood how he'd arrived there. He was not seriously hurt. He was down. The group recalibrated. The leader against the car straightened up, not in preparation for action, but in the way a person straightens up when they are revising a conclusion. He looked at Chuck. Chuck looked back. Nothing was said for several seconds. The group left. Not dramatically, not in the way of stories where the defeated party retreats with declarations. They simply moved. First, the one on the ground got up, and then they started walking, spreading out, going in different directions, which is also a very old behavior, the body of the group disaggregating when the logic of the group has dissolved. Chuck turned to Daniel. He said something simple, asked if he was all right, and Daniel said yes, and Chuck nodded and said good, and that was essentially the end of their exchange. He did not explain himself. He did not wait for gratitude in any extended form. He went back inside the bar and finished the drink he had set down. Daniel Ruiz stood in the parking lot for a moment. He has told this story several times in the years since, not in any formal or public venue, but to people who knew him, in the way that you tell a story when you know it is true, and you also know that people will doubt it. He said that the strangest part was not the speed of what Chuck did, the single movement that put the first man on the ground, but the time before that, the silence, the quality of stillness in Chuck's body that seemed to inform the situation without speaking to it. He had been surrounded by 6 men who were going to do what they were going to do, and then someone had walked out of a bar and stood there and changed the physics of the whole thing without raising his voice, or for nearly all of the encounter, or raising his hands. The people who heard Daniel's account often asked the same question. Why? Why had Chuck walked out there? He didn't know Daniel Ruiz. He had no stake in what happened in that parking lot. The answer, as Daniel understood it from their brief exchange and from everything he would later learn about Chuck Norris, is not complicated, though it is also not simple. Tang Soo Do, the system that had organized Chuck's life for 13 years by that point, is not a system designed for competition alone. It is a system of values made physical, and one of those values, pressed down through its Korean Confucian roots and its Buddhist underpinnings, is the obligation of the strong to the vulnerable. Not an abstract obligation, a specific one. You do not walk past what is happening if you have the capacity to address it. The capacity creates the obligation. This is not heroism. It is ethics in a practical and immediate form. Like what also governed Chuck's response, and this is the part that the mythology of martial arts sometimes obscures, was the restraint. He used exactly what was needed, not more. The goal was not to demonstrate capability or to hurt someone or to be seen doing what he was doing. The goal was to change the situation. The situation changed. He was done. The bartender, whose name was Raymond, talked about it afterward to the couple who had watched from the doorway. He had seen things in that bar over the years. It was not the kind of place where life was always perfectly civil. But he said he had never seen anything quite like what he saw the night. Not the physical part. The stillness. The way Chuck had moved through the whole event as if it were simply a thing that needed doing. The way you move when you fix a leak or pay a bill. Not with drama, but with purpose. And with the completion that comes from doing a thing correctly. Chuck Norris never spoke publicly about that evening. It is not the kind of thing he would speak publicly about. His public persona was already beginning its evolution from tournament champion to cultural figure, and the story of a parking lot in Los Angeles in 1971 was not something that fit neatly into any of the containers available for it. Too specific to be a lesson, too private to be a statement. But Daniel Ruiz remembered, and the bartender Raymond remembered, and the couple who stood in the doorway remembered. Memory is not nothing. Sometimes it is everything that remains when the people who deserve to be seen finally get seen, even by only a few, even in the amber light of a bar on a rainy side street, at the hour when the city is deciding what it is. Los Angeles, California, autumn 1971.